Is this an allusion to Faulkner's Light in August?
You you are the second person to catch that. The
Yes! I'll
first
take number
person
two.
is
Hey everybody, thank you as always for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm very excited to have Ed Park as my guest for the third episode of the Author Talks series. He is a writer, teacher, editor, critic, and diehard Buffalo Sabres fan. Ed Park and I first connected through Instagram, where he graciously responded to my absurdly long video on Thomas Pynchon's Against the Day. At the time, I had read various pieces of Park's scattered all over the internet in various venues, but his new book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, I had not read yet, though it was firmly on my radar. Over time, we chatted about Gordon Shepherd's Ha, a self-murder mystery, The Logogryph by Thomas Wharton, which I'm still trying to hunt down and secure, and a litany of other titles and shelfie picks, and eventually I exclaimed, "Wow, you are a real reader." And Park replied, "Don't be fooled, I mostly read junk." I secured a copy of Same Bed, Different Dreams, but prior commitments kept me from it for months. Then I heard the announcement that it won the LA Times Prize for Fiction. And not much later, the book was a finalist for the Pulitzer. At that time, Park and I agreed on a date to have a conversation before I had even read the book. But when the time came, I had to postpone again. So I finally read the book, and I immediately thought to myself, okay, there's no way I can have a proper conversation about this book until I read it again. It's just one of those that's made to be reread. So I postponed our talk once more, which also gave me time to read his first novel, Personal Days, and again, a sumptuous offering of his deep archives, or Parkives, as he refers to them. And of course, Same Bed, Different Dreams, again. Then it was August, and one of my favorite writers of all time, William T. Vollmann, published a piece of reportage in Harper's Magazine, reporting from none other than the Korean DMZ. At this point, I realized that forces were definitely at work to induct me into the Korean Provisional Government, and it was my duty to make this video. Park has a resume that should make him off limits to people like me, but he is as generous as he is successful. A founding editor of The Believer, an editor at the Poetry Foundation, an editor for The Village Voice, a science fiction columnist for the LA Times, an editor at Amazon Publishing, where he was even given his own imprint called Little A. Executive editor at Penguin Press, editor of anthologies, writer of introductions, writer of an impressive number of works in the likes of The New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, Lapham's Quarterly, Harper's Magazine, Book Forum, and many others. Writer of short stories and novels, teacher of graduate writing programs at Columbia University and now Princeton. Ed Park, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm a fan of yours, so it's a real honor to be here.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. And we've also talked about the Buffalo connection, though I never lived there. I did date a girl from Buffalo and went there a couple of times with her family. And
Yeah.
I quickly realized that people there are a little bit different about their city than people from other cities. And especially when it came to the Sabres and the Bills
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah, it's really like both teams. I guess these days the Bills are yeah, they're a strong team, so
Yeah.
there's some hope, but there are so many years in between successful squads for both of the sports that it really does sometimes feel like a kind of unusually punitive religion. But yeah, I mean, I've been kind of following them as long as I can remember. I was born in Buffalo,
Yeah.
in many years ago, and I mean, I think it helped me. My dad definitely was was a fan of both from the get-go, and he has memories of going to see. I mean, this is crazy, and maybe even a topic for the next thing I'm writing. But
Oh,
like
okay.
when
Preview.
Jack Kemp, later politician, Jack Kemp was the quarterback, and O.J. Simpson was there, and just thinking of like those two figures and their
Mm-hmm.
paths, I think is fascinating. So, but yeah, it's we don't have to keep talking about sports, but I kind of look forward to the fall and winter
Yeah.
when the seasons begin, but it's also like it's been kind of nice this summer not to really have to have to think about, every week, the heartache or the,
The heartache. Yeah.
or the joy, So
Yeah.
I gotta get ready for that. I feel I don't know if you've read a fan's notes, Frederick Exley, just like his description of how he feels before every. I think it's the Giants that he follows. Every Giants game is just. I mean, it perfectly captures that kind of physical feeling you have of dread and
Yeah.
possible joy. So.
I haven't read that A Fan's Notes book, but the only A Fan's Notes that I've read is Stephen Moore's monograph on Alexander Theroux.
Oh, I did, and is it called A Fan's
It's
Notes?
subtitled A
Subtitled.
Fan's
Oh, that's
Notes.
great.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's wonderful,
Yeah.
and it's actually kind of unexpected because though Moore has been quoted as saying that Theroux's book Darkenville's Cat, he hopes to be buried with it clasped to his chest.
Huh, really?
And nonetheless, though, Moore opens up about sort of his gripes with what Theroux would go on to
Yeah.
do throughout the years of writing.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting book, even though it's a fan's notes. Because he's still a fan, but he's not exactly
Right.
been a happy one, which I think maps well onto fans of Buffalo teams.
Yeah. Well, if he ever writes a sports version of it, I will definitely read it. I'm indebted to his book on the recognitions. I actually
Oh
have
yeah,
this was a long time ago,
the
but
annotations.
the
Yeah,
annotated. I mean, that's almost as important as the recognitions itself, and I actually don't think you need it, but
yeah.
it's certainly like adds a layer to that experience. I mean, you're such a wonderful reader of Gaddis, and
Oh, thank you.
not to kind of throw this in there too soon, but reading the recognitions, and I've been thinking a lot because I've read all of Gaddis,
Hmm.
and I don't actually remember Carpenter's Gothic that much, but all of the big ones sort of had an impact on me. But looking back, I think it is the recognitions, which is the first book
Yeah,
of his that I read, that almost like reading Ulysses or Pale Fire. It was one of those books that felt like it was giving me a map into how a novel could be made of that scale and that ambition. So I always kind of keep that. It's just kind of become a part of how I write, especially even in Personal Days, which is a far shorter book. But this idea of layering and you're almost writing it so that it can be enjoyed the first time, but also hopefully
yeah.
reread with more insight and pleasure. So
Yeah, I think I definitely see the connection in terms of what I call, and I'm certain that I didn't coin this, I picked this up somewhere, but
yeah.
markers. I noticed
Mm-hmm.
that with Gaddis and people of that ilk, he gives you these, instead of concrete narrator intrusive explicit cues about who this is and what's going on, it's more markers, almost like stage
Exactly.
props or something
Yeah. Yeah.
to help you recognize certain characters, to where when you're reading it the first time you're like, oh, I think that's so and so, or
That's right.
oh,
Yeah.
that may have been Wyatt, but I'm
Right.
not
Right.
100% sure. And so as you're encountering them the first time, like you're saying, what's happening is you're getting
Yeah.
these markers. You're coming into contact with markers, but it's different from what most of us have been taught reading is and how writing is to be done, where it's supposed to be very clear who each person is.
Yeah.
Such that, you come into those subsequent reads with this sort of list or bundle of markers. And it's almost like the first read is to gather the markers without really knowing what to do with them. And subsequent reads, it's like the book then activates those markers.
That's a great way of putting it, and I like that. I like that term, markers. And not to dwell on it too much now, but that is, there's so much in the recognitions. And actually, I mentioned Ulysses and Pale Fire.
Yeah.
I think those books are like that as well,
Yes.
where you kind of, there's something about this character that catches your eye, and you file it away, and then later, 30 pages later, you might be like, wait a second, is that, is this character actually, have I met her before? And I really did. That's really one of the methods of Same Bed, because as you know, and we can discuss this later, it actually starts with a big party scene, which I feel like Gaddis and Anthony Pohl is another favorite of mine. Like, they do these great party scenes, and I wanted to sort of start with a party scene and then, follow most of those characters, both backwards and forwards in time from that point. So
and you did a great job using a sort of Pynchon-esque way of giving proper names to the characters. Like Euphrates, Monk Zingapan.
Exactly.
That where it like sticks out because hundreds of pages later, you can activate that marker using just that name. It's like, oh, wait a sec, because I remember the second time I read it, I thought, oh, that's the same Monk Zingapan from way back at the party scene. And the first time I didn't quite catch it, but I knew because of that. And plus, he's Filipino, right?
He is.
So he's working on a great work called Manila Wafers, which I thought was really funny. And so little things like that, using humor to pun on the name and where they're from, really sticks. And we could go on and on, but I really appreciated that about Same Dreams, Same Bed, not Same Dream.
Same Bed, Same Dreams.
Let me just give a little bit of context, just as we go into the conversation, just for people who may not have read it, just to have something to grease the rails here. So first, sort of the true historical context that is in the book. In 1910, Imperial Japan officially ruled a unified Korea until the end of World War II. In 1948, Korea split into North and South, with a dividing line of the 38th parallel being decided by external powers. In 1950, the Korean War officially broke out. An armistice was signed in 1953, but Korea was just as divided at that time as it had been at the end of World War II. For most Westerners, myself included, the Korean War ended long ago. But, as I said, William T. Volman just reported from the Korean DMZ for Harper's, to Koreans, the war never ended. They are still engaged in it. And even Kim Jong-un rejected the idea of reunification again in January of this year. In 1919, the Korean Provisional Government, I'm still in the true history by the way, was founded in Shanghai as a government in exile, vying for a recovery of an independent Korea from Japan. In 1945, after Japan's surrender, the KPG came to an end. But what you do in Same Bed, Different Dreams is to question what it might have been like if the KPG actually hadn't come to an end. What if they are the invisible hand orchestrating international events right under our noses? And along with this plotting, you investigate what history is. What is at the intersection of history, memory, and dreams? What if history is really those connections between what we usually call history? For me, there are two types of books, and we've kind of already gotten into this, but those that are made to read best on that first reading. Sort of the shock books and things like that, the revelation books. Then there are those books that are designed made to read even better, to come alive more and more with each subsequent reading, and yours is decidedly the latter. It's designed such that the reader experiences the maximum number of aha moments possible. And like we've just said a little bit ago, pieces I couldn't quite fit together the first time snapped satisfyingly into place the second time. So let's start in with our questions, our discussion points proper, with the title of the book.
Yeah.
In both of your novels, you include a book of the same title, though slightly tweaked within the text. So with Personal Daze, there is a book, Personal Daze, but it's spelled D-A-Z-E. And in Same Bed, Different Dreams, there is a book or a text of the same title, but with a comma in the middle. So Same Bed, comma, Different Dreams. A comma which some critics have likened to the 38th parallel that divides Korea. Lauren Blackburn, writing in the Daily Princetonian, reported that you encountered the titular expression in an email from your father over 20 years ago. And in the book, it operates as a sort of proverb that invokes the different dreams of North and South Korea within the divided peninsula of Korea. But it also operates as the different dreams of nations kind of at power plays around Korea. Japan, China, Russia, and the United States, notably. But more generally, it refers to two presumably intimate people who can share the same bed, yet be totally divided. So I want to suggest that you have usurped none other than Ernest Hemingway for telling a powerful story in the fewest words. The apocryphal anecdote with Hemingway goes that he responded to a bet with a 6-word story. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And while that is very powerful, now I think you've done it in only 4 words. Same bed, different dreams.
Wow, that's amazing. Of course, I know the Hemingway anecdote well, but
Yeah.
I did not. There's something about the title "Same Bed, Different Dreams" that you've articulated it well. Like when I first heard about it, when I first read it, it just felt like so much was suggested out of so few words.
Yeah.
The concision, and I guess if you look at it, this is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. The Korean, it's an Asian saying. So it started probably has its origins in China, but it's popular. It's known throughout Asia and especially in Korea. But there's a way of writing it in Chinese that's just 4 characters, right? So it's it's even shorter in a way than four words, like with all the letters. I think that it's something that I just kept around, right? I just kept that phrase around. And there's actually a previous, I have a bunch of titles that I'll just, like if I'm working on something, usually a story, sometimes I'll throw the title on to see if it works and then take it away. But there was, I don't think I've actually mentioned this before, there was around 2011 maybe, I had kind of this other idea, and I was going to call it Same Bed, Different Dreams. And I wrote maybe, I don't know, let's say 30, 40 pages. And the idea was like I think it was a missing movie director or somebody who wrote, it was like a Korean TV series. This was kind of before the explosion in K-drama in this country. But, anyway, so that was called Same Bed, Different Dreams. And then I just, it wasn't quite working. Like I didn't know what I guess the different episodes of the TV show were the different dreams or something, but it didn't quite click. So I, put it away for a couple more years and then brought it out again. And this time it worked. I love the thing about the comma. I think I must have read that in a review too, the comma in the book within the book, right?
There are some really incisive and creative critics out there.
Yeah, no, I'll buy that. That sounds good. It definitely was not conscious. However, I will say the book was originally my book was called Same Bed, Different Dreams with a comma, and then really late in the process, like somewhere in the last, year to 6 months, I was like, wait, what if we took out the comma? So that was a really late change, and it didn't really make any sense, but once I took out the comma, it just I love the title even more. Like it really worked for me. So
There are three different narrative threads woven together along different timelines and different perspectives. So, going in order as I perceive it, one, we've got the Parker Jotter thread. And Parker Jotter, I love that name, is a black American Korean War veteran who writes pulp fiction. Then there's the thread of Soon Sheen, an Asian American, though he bulks at that term in the book proper. Writer turned minion of a tech behemoth, which I really related to. And same bed, comma, different dreams, a text that purports to be the true account of the Korean provisional government told in 5 dreams throughout the book. The Parker Jotter thread leads everything off with a sort of amuse-bouche of 2 wonderful pages, chronologically set after everything we're going to encounter in that thread. Since the Jotter thread will then snap back to the 60s and work its way forward decade by decade back to the 2000s. This choice reminded me of the chronological play at the opening of Infinite Jest, and I think virtually ensures that we will be compelled to go back and reread the book, of course, but also compelled to go back and read those opening pages as soon as you finish the book. In this sort of preluded epilogue, 3 scholars are talking about what history is to a crowded room in some official space, possibly Gloat, Soon Sheen's employer. Towards the end, we are told that someone is furtively recording an attendee who can't keep himself awake. He's sitting there pinching his thighs, trying to stay awake. Sounds like me in one of my own town halls. And it reads like this. During the debate, someone secretly records a colleague pinching his own thighs, struggling to keep his eyes open, to no avail. Soon the man is snoring. On stage, the first scholar booms. What is history? The subject wakes with a start, slurps back saliva. Part of the fun of your book is deciphering its many, many clues and puzzles and markers, as we've talked about at the beginning of this video. After all, through Clara Euphrates, you write, stories are games. Reading the book a second time, one of the questions I had in mind was, who are these people in this opening scene, and who is this person nodding off? So part of me wants to read your sentence that goes, soon the man is snoring, as the man named Soon is snoring, and say that this is Soon Sheen. In any case, Soon Sheen operates as our sort of everyman. So whether or not it is or isn't Soon Sheen specifically, I want to make the assertion that when you write, on stage, the first scholar booms, what is history? The subject wakes with a start. This is you, Ed Park, the writer, awakening us, the readers, to history, right at the start of the book. It's like an enunciation. Furthermore, there's a double entendre at play in the word choice of the subject wakes with a start, such that this could also be read as the subject of history that's being awakened.
yeah, that is a great read of this, very short prologue, and I agree with everything you said. Actually, this, I think when I wrote "Soon the man is snoring," I think when I first wrote it, it was just the adverb "soon," right? And then seeing it later, I was like, wait, nothing is, in some ways, nothing is accidental, right? And it just seemed like I could have a little ambiguity there. And one way to read it is that before we've even met Soon Sheen, one of the main narrators of the book, we've actually seen him. We're like the people who may have gotten this semi-viral meme or video of him.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
In his town hall. So that was in there. I will also say, like, this prelude was written it was one of the later things that I wrote in the book. Like the main structure was already there, and I will just shout out to. I believe I was thinking of like some of these Don DeLillo novels, Running Dog and Players, and maybe some others, where you kind of have this short chapter at the beginning that's like quite, you don't really know what's going on, and it doesn't necessarily seem to connect. Like you kind of forget about it for a while, but it does always feel like part of the book, and it's like some kind of statement being made. So everything you're saying about history, and the subject, and awakening the reader, or yeah, and also awakening myself. And I think in a funny way, maybe this figure who could be Soon, could be the character named Soon, who's like trying to stay awake. I'm thinking of like, Joyce's History is a Nightmare, from which I'm trying to awake, but also I don't want the reader to fall asleep. It's kind of like telling the reader, there's a lot coming at you.
Yeah.
Let's try to stay awake. Stay with me here. And there's some humor, I think, in this prelude as well. So
Oh, definitely.
trying to get everybody ready, myself included, to embark on this book, because it is. I'll just say again, I do think of myself as a comic novelist in kind of many important ways, but it is a complicated book. There's, as you really put it so well, like you delineating the three different strands, and some of those strands have like different voices within them.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
want to, there's maybe kind of a statement of ambition too here in the prologue. Just like let's all get ready. It's gonna, hopefully it'll be entertaining as well, but we'll do our best to try to piece it all together.
Yeah, it's not unlike sort of the Homeric invocation of the muses and the statement of scope at the
Yeah,
beginning
yeah.
of epic poetry. But you're right. That I think that's what kind of sets your novel a little bit apart. Is that how do I put this? I don't want to say that Gaddis isn't funny.
Oh,
I
he's
def
very, yeah. I think he's great.
because
Yeah,
yeah, there's a seriousness and a severity with Gaddis that isn't in your book. You have all of the complexity of a Gaddis, Delillo, and a Pynchon, but and I know other people have talked about it, there's an accessibility to your book that isn't there with some of those others. And I think part of that comes from, I think it's like you said, you consider yourself a comic novelist. And of course, one of one of the things about comedy is you've got to know your audience and you've got to
yeah.
bring them along,
Right.
so that they're getting the joke. So that
Yeah.
almost like I need to bring you in on this joke so that when I hit certain things, you're there with me and can
Yeah.
can get the maximal amount of
Yeah.
reaction and experience. But I was just trying to think about what it is that makes your book, a little bit different. You have all of the same hallmarks that are there, but there is something about your book that makes it. This is Ed Park. This isn't.
Thank you.
You make it such that you can't be criticized for being DeLillo light or Pynchon light because you have forged a new voice.
Yeah, all of those writers, I mean, their voice, their authorial identity is so strong that you're, as a writer, you want to, part of you wants to just you know go with it, almost mimic their voice,
Yeah.
and then you also have to figure out how to make it your own thing. And I haven't really read those writers in a while. I read them long ago for the most part. So they're all kind of like internalized. But I guess I will say, like, for DeLillo at least, I think there's humor in all of those writers. I think DeLillo maybe stands out, and
Yeah.
in some ways is my. I don't want to play favorites, but what appealed to me about him is just the way the humor could be just very silly and smart at the same time. And I think his strongest novels have this great balance between the systems novel and the
Yeah.
comic novel. There's a book called Ratner's Star,
Yeah.
which is like a mind-blowing book. Like, the whole structure and conception of it is amazing, but page by page and line by line, it is just crazy,
Yeah.
funny, like laugh out loud, hilarious. And you probably know about the book Amazons that he
Yes.
wrote
I have
under
not read
pseudonym.
it, but I do know about it.
It's just every single page is funny, and it's about hockey. It's like
Yes.
the best novel about hockey. And he started co-writing it with a friend of his, and they wrote it under the name Cleo Birdwell. But
Hmm.
I've heard that it's actually mostly, at some point, it's just mostly him
I have
writing
a
it.
friend
And
who is a DeLillo nut. I mean,
yeah,
he has a hoodie that has the Dunkin' Donuts logo, but it's Don
oh,
DeLillo. I mean,
it's done.
yeah. And
I like it.
he
I
just
like it.
recently read Amazon's because he's acquired all the first editions of all the DeLillos,
Very
and he
nice.
said that he definitely detects mostly DeLillo in that novel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's worth a read. It's not just. It's kind of like, it's not even in print, but you can find it for affordable
Yeah.
prices, I think,
And
online.
then Ratner's star, Adam Levin, actually emailed me about that
Oh,
way early on when he and I first started emailing. And
okay.
we were just kind of trading book recommendations. And then some months
Oh,
went
very
by, and
cool.
all of a sudden he just sent me an email, and he's like, dude, Ratner's star. I can't believe this book. Funniest thing I've ever
Yeah.
read. I mean, he was just like blown away.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Oh,
but
great.
so yeah, now
I'm glad there are fans of that book.
yeah, the
Yeah.
DeLillo novels that you named earlier in the discussion, I haven't read any of those. I think you named, I can't remember which ones, but I'm familiar with the titles. I've only
Yeah.
read like four or five,
Yeah.
and they're mostly the ones that are well known. Underworld, of course,
Sure.
which I definitely detect as an influence
Yeah,
on
no,
Sane Ben.
very much so. And Underworld, you know, I didn't really go back to look at Underworld. But my experience of reading that is so, is so memorable that
Yeah.
just kind of like I would think about the size of Underworld and like the way he threaded, different narrative voices in it.
Uh huh.
And of course, it is all about 20th century history, but in a way that's it's beautifully paced and
Mm-hmm.
um, easy to follow, despite its
Yeah.
complexity. So that was definitely one of his I had in mind.
Yeah, I
I
read
mean,
one critic. I
yeah,
can't remember who it was. I could comb through these things, but someone likened the baseball that makes its way through Underworld to
yeah.
the dream text of the KPG in your novel.
Yeah. And okay, so that's a good point. Yeah, the baseball that keeps, it's one of the characters gets it, in the game, the baseball game that begins the book, and
Hmm.
it kind of like changes hands. And I think I was thinking about that, not so much about the dreams, the
Hmm.
book within the book, but with like there are like a lot of objects in my book,
Yeah,
and just
a
I think
lighter,
I think
the lighter maybe.
the lighter,
Yeah,
yes, I think that's what it was, the lighter, the Zippo
yeah,
lighter that appears in many of the chapters
yeah,
across various decades. Yeah, that is definitely from the, you know, I think at some level, like I understood
yeah.
that happened with the
It's
baseball
very
in
effective,
Underworld.
and especially the lighter becomes a key piece
Yeah,
to
it just snaps. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
snaps into place.
Another thing, kind of backing up a little bit,
Yeah,
when we were talking about that opening sequence, and if I just wanted to say, if that is Soon Sheen, who is being recorded and the video goes viral of him trying to stay awake during the history lecture, um, that opening vignette, if you will, is part of the Parker Jotter thread, only because
yeah,
of its title tells me
yeah,
that it is. And
yes,
I was just going to say, if that is Soon Sheen, then it just struck me that that is you. That would mean that you brought those two threads together. Like all of a
yeah,
sudden, oh, here's Soon Sheen in the Parker Jotter thread at sort of at the end of the book, at the beginning.
totally.
Yeah.
It's totally true. There was a review by Alexander Chee in the New Republic that I just thought was so was so brilliant. But I think he might have been the only critic to point out that what you just did, that the heading for that prologue
Yeah.
is 2333 colon
Right.
the scholars. So it belongs in that thread of Parker Jotter, because Parker Jotter's magnum opus, this series of science fiction novels, paperback books
Yeah.
called 2333,
Right.
right?
And I didn't catch
Um,
that the first time I read it. It was only the second time. I thought,
It's a lot
Oh,
of,
wait a second.
I'm throwing a lot of kind of information out there,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that that is what you said and what Alex said. Like, I think these are ways of reading the book, and that chapter specifically that actually shows, you know, one of the things I was trying to do with the book is trying to make these different strands meet
Yes.
by the end. But if you look at it your way, they've actually already met at the
Right.
beginning.
Right. We're at the
So
end
it's
with
sort of,
all the strands
yeah,
tied together,
yeah,
converging.
yeah. It is that that kind of Mobius strip
Yes.
effect, I think.
Did you? And
Um,
you said that was Alexander Chi writing in the.
I believe in the New Republic,
Somehow I missed that review.
one of the later reviews, it's really good. And then well, you know what? He also, somebody sent me, or he has a Substack, and he had like the stuff he cut from the review. So
Ah,
it might have been in that
oh, I
actually.
like that. Yeah,
And
somehow
I
I
was just
totally
like,
missed. I don't have any review
yeah.
from the New Republic in here. Somehow I missed that one. I'll go back
It's a,
and seek it out.
the other thing I liked about his review is he had read Personal Days when it came out, and
Ah,
he had this idea that the company in Personal Days, this unnamed company,
uh-huh.
is actually bought by
I'm
Gloat.
sure it was.
Well, I didn't plan it that way, but I was looking at Personal Days for a different reason the
Uh-huh.
other day, and the way it's described, the way the takeover is described, I'm like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
that could be Gloat that's taking it over. So I like this idea of the books kind of being connected in that
Yeah,
way.
certainly. That let's see, does that read me? Oh, that actually will lead very nicely into the next
Okay.
discussion prompt because
Yeah.
Sun Shin's dog in Same Bed is named Sprout, and that dog plays
Yes.
a very important role in the book. But that name also has roots in your first book, Personal Days, as the name of the office manager. But if I remember correctly, it's the Sprout. The
Yeah,
Sprout.
the Sprout.
Yeah.
They call him the
The
Sprout. Yeah.
Sprout, yeah. But I want to make one of those leaps of the imagination that readers like me just can't help make, especially with a book like yours that toys so endlessly with language and is so exuberantly literary. I have a list of no less than 30 literary allusions that you've
Oh wow.
I think they've just
That
naturally
many. Yeah,
seeped
no, I
out of
believe
you.
you. Yeah, I
Some of
believe
them
you.
are deliberate, you can tell, but I think some you
Right.
just, like some of the headings in the subsections of the dreams, to the
Mm-hmm.
lighthouse, and some others.
Right.
Much ado about
Right.
nothing. They just kind of
Yeah,
come out.
yeah.
You've got all this, and anagrams in particular
Yeah.
seem to feature pretty prominently in your book. And one possible anagram for Sprout is my beloved Proust. The dog
That's
has an
right.
affliction called Dorchester syndrome that causes him to archive printed objects. The material that he happens to bury and dig up is referred to as dreams. So in
Mhm.
your book, you effectively have a Proust who is doing no less than digging up dreams, recovering buried history. And I
I
also
love
feel
it.
like my assertion is warranted since Proust is evoked explicitly, pun intended, in your book with a launch party for Amy Ma's latest erotic anthology, Remembrance of Thongs Past.
That's right. Yeah, Proust is definitely in there. I had hit upon, I think for Personal Days, so there's a character named the
Mhm.
Sprout, because his name is Russell, so they're like Brussels
Oh, I love
sprouts.
it.
So it's just kind of like inane
It's exactly how
wordplay.
Office Place monikers. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
perfect. Well, I don't think it's in Personal Days, but I definitely, I'm an inveterate anagram maker, and so Sprout as Proust is something that I definitely grasped.
Hmm.
I don't think I put it in Personal Days, but I was aware of it, and I thought in Same Bed to name the dog Sprout would be just I just wanted one little callback to Personal Days, and I think I had a whole like I don't think I put it in the book, but this whole idea that maybe the Sprout had died at the end of Personal Days, and this was his reincarnation.
Yeah.
Like
I
the
heard you say
timing would
that.
kind of work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm very happy that you Remembrance of Thongs Past is one of my favorite jokes in the book, and, along with the New York Review of Boobs.
Yes, yeah,
Um, and just very, very like low humor, but
yes,
with it's like low high. Like
yeah.
you have to know that I'm talking about Proust and I guess the New York Review of Books. So,
Yeah, and you made me
it's
flip
just,
back when you
yeah.
made me flip back to see, did he actually write the New York Review of Boobs? And I read it. Right.
Yeah, I think it's seen on a T-shirt, and somebody
Yeah.
at first thinks it just says New York Review of Books, and then they're like, "Wait a second." Yeah, so I wanted you to have that reaction. I love that, like Sprout slash Proust and archiving
Yes.
and dreams. It's I guess on a semi-conscious level, I guess I was working in that way, but I love the way you kind of explained that.
Oh, thank you. And I restrained myself from, going a little further and saying that an anagram for dog is God, and and going. And I was like, okay, this is where
Right,
you need to
right.
draw the line. This might be going a little too far, even though he's digging up these dreams at very opportune times,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
kind
No,
of. But yeah,
hey,
who
I'll buy
knows?
it. I'll buy it.
Oh, I got giddy when I read this. An old man sits in a room full of paper. For decades, he's been compiling a book that is more than a book. Every day, he combs newspapers for pieces that fit his thesis, which has become so vast that it resembles a theory of the world. He hunts for scientific anomalies, accounts of disasters, human interest stories with an ironic angle or bizarre detail. And my immediate thought when I read that the very first time was, this is Charles Hoy Fort. It has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a few pages later, my thought was validated when I read, he subscribes to, and these are names of periodicals, Fate,
Yeah,
and then 40 times, 40
yeah.
times, which was and maybe still is. I think it was resurrected, maybe in the
I
UK.
think it's still around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it definitely takes its namesake from Charles Fort.
Yep.
Blah blah blah. Any periodical that takes seriously the possibility of UFOs and interstellar voyagers. So, the first time I encountered the figure of Charles Fort was over 10 years ago when I read this very intriguing book that was recommended to me, and it's called Morning of the Magicians. And it's got
Huh.
one of those long subtitles, Secret Societies, Conspiracies, and Vanished Civilizations, by two Frenchmen, Louis
Uh-huh.
Paul and Jacques Bergier. I was fascinated by that book to the point that I grabbed a copy of Fort's probably most popular book, The Book of the Damned, which refers not to people, but more like damning evidence of
Yeah.
conspiracies going on. These figures, just in general, these characters, let's call them, even though Charles Fort's real, these characters who become obsessed with researching and documenting anomalies in the face of a skeptical public are always so alluring to me. I wouldn't even consider myself a conspiracy theorist, though I do
Right.
like watching some conspiracy documentaries and so on.
Yes.
I've got
Yeah.
friends who stay online and go into these like almost
Go into
cyber
those.
sleuthing
Yeah.
things. I'm not quite
Yeah.
there, but it's still intriguing. What's even more alluring is when one of these figures' lives is cut short. And there are a lot of connections to your book in figures like Roberto Bolaño, Robert Musil, Yi Sang, and Arthur Rimbaud, Charles Fort, Walter Benjamin, whom we'll get into in just a moment. There seems to be fictional incarnations of these lives in your book with people like Parker Jotter and, please forgive the pronunciation, but Cho Yujin, or
Yeah.
Echo, as his
Echo,
publisher
right.
wants to
Yeah.
wants to call him.
It's hard to explain how this, what a typical writing day was for me for this book, but you know, that that description of an old man sits alone in a room full of paper. At some point in one of the dreams, one of the book in the book within the book, I get into a discussion or a thread following, mild spoiler, but like the TV career of James Dean and Betsy Palmer, who later appears in Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And so I'm just looking at the times that they acted in things together. And there was this one TV drama that I kind of describe in the book. And in that drama, so I was watching it, there is an old man in the building. I think he's the superintendent, and that's what he does. He like clips stuff and puts in a book. And the James Dean character is this kind of young punk, but he's the only one who sort of understands what this guy is doing. But that's how the image came to me. And then I kind of expanded from there. And Charles Fort is someone, I think I've read all of Charles Fort. Like I've read all of his four books. There's also Bill Gray in Mao 2, DeLillo,
I haven't read that one yet.
yeah, but the idea of like this, or Salinger himself, this
Oh yeah,
Salinger-esque
Salinger. That's a good.
writer
Yeah,
who's like writing, pages and pages
yeah.
and not publishing and sort of sitting on a pile of manuscripts. Like that image to me is fascinating. And I'm also fascinated by the writers who have published a lot. And so someone like Bolaño, where at least for the Anglophone world, we come to him posthumously, right? He died, but all these books started coming into English and kind of reshaping how we think about the novel. So it's a very I don't know if romantic is the right word, but it's a
Yeah,
certain idea of the author, right? That's
absolutely.
very like
Yeah.
the words are the only thing important to this person. Yi Song, who you mentioned, this really still very radical modernist Korean writer who died in 1937 under kind of mysterious circumstances. He kind of figures into the novel as well,
Yes.
and he's someone, I think I first heard about him over 20 years ago, just a short anthology of his works. And I was like, who is this guy and why is it so strange? And so he kind of like has always been there. And I reviewed a collection of his stuff while I was writing Same Bed. And that really helped inform, you know, he just became a much deeper character
Hmm.
after I read much more of his works because I was writing a piece about it. Um,
Yeah, I read
yeah,
that
but all
piece,
these.
and
Oh, okay,
that's the
great.
piece that caused me to go and buy that book,
That
that
book,
sort of
that's
collection of
yeah,
his mostly poetry, but also prose and some essays.
yeah,
And
and
I
there's
kind of got, I can't believe that I've
it's
not known about this writer. I mean, it's excellent work.
and he's such a radical writer. One thing that comes up in my book is like one of his poems is like a grid of numbers that's
Yes.
been reversed. Like that's the poem. But a major award in South Korea, a major literary award, is the Yisang Award,
Yeah.
and Han Kang, who wrote The Vegetarian, that
Yeah.
won the Yisang Award. It's like
And Greek
as
lessons
if
now.
yeah, as if in America, we had a major award named after like,
Yeah.
I don't know who the most radical experiment, well, the Gertrude Stein Award or
Gertrude
something.
Stein. Yeah.
Maybe that exists. Maybe there's a Penn Gertrude
Yeah.
Stein Award.
Maybe.
I don't know. All right. Anyway, but yes, yeah, this is I'm just enchanted by figures like that.
Yeah, same.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is that's still my idea of the artist. It's just sort of a madman, mad woman, just and all that matters is that world they're building, and they
right.
they starve, they die on their with their heads slumped over the typewriter.
Yeah.
They never published anything. All that mattered was
Right, right.
I think about Gaddis out in his garage on Long Island, with the stuff everywhere, and just has to get
Right,
those
right.
pages are all that matter. But yeah, I think I said Yi Sang, Yi Song. I got to get that A
Oh,
train
oh yeah,
straight
yeah,
over.
yeah.
But Yi Song is probably the out of books always lead to other books.
Yeah.
Especially when they're, as like I said, exuberantly literary as yours. It's pointing all over the place. But definitely Yi Song is the greatest discovery for me
Oh,
to have
great.
come out of the work you've done, including the New York Review of Books review that you did on his work, because as good as that collection was that you reviewed directly, I then went on to get a copy of Wings,
Yeah.
and
Wings is tremendous. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, the first few pages, I was just like, this is the kind of writing that I really am drawn to. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, good.
strange, but it's so evocative. Uh, it's so deeply poetic, but yet there's a
Hmm.
physicality. Maybe because a lot of the poetry is talking about the body and so on.
Hmm.
But yeah, so thank you
Yeah.
for
Well, I'm so
bringing
glad
my
you
attention to Yi Song.
glad you were turned on to him. Yeah, that's great.
One of the countless mystery enshrouded initiatives at Gloat, the tech juggernaut that's slowly absorbing the entire world and recreating it in its own image, involves evaluating groups of kids who test drive batches of video games. Soon Sheen, as he is wont to do, puns this as the Arcades Project, which is, of course, also the title of Walter Benjamin's final unfinished masterpiece. And David Gordon, interviewing you in Bomb magazine, pointed out this connection, saying, "It makes me think of Walter Benjamin's Arcades Project, where he gathered all these scraps of information about Paris,
Yeah.
old clippings, quotes, bits of ephemera, and fitted them together to reveal this hidden truth of history." In the interview, it's more or less kind of casually tossed out and, doesn't go deeply pressing into
Yeah.
the Arcades Project connection. But the more I think about it, the more Benjamin's project coincides sort of perfectly with your book. And then, yet, unlike Charles Fort's work, the Arcades Project, cut short by Benjamin's suicide, has been cited by scholars as having potentially been one of the greatest works of cultural criticism of the 20th century. So I was just thinking, obviously they're two totally different figures. Benjamin's very respected sort of scholar, philosopher, and so on. Charles Fort, more of an outsider, more of a cult figure. But what is it
Yeah.
that separates? And I was thinking that perhaps it's because Fort, unlike Benjamin, had that capacity or maybe the audacity to include UFOs.
UFOs. I think they're more similar than we think. I mean, some of the superficial things you mentioned are certainly true, and among the intelligentsia, more people are liable to have read something by Benjamin than Charles Fort. But they're, I don't know, there's something about their methodology that's actually, I feel like there's a kinship there. I would also say Fort, as strange as he seems to people today, and the Fortean Times and things like that, you know, he wasn't this outsider at the time, right? Dreiser was a big champion of him.
Oh, that's
His
right.
books were widely read and published. Um, so it's kind of like, times change, and authors' legacies, you never know what's gonna happen. I have a favorite writer named Harry Stephen Keeler, who's a
Yeah.
Chicago mystery writer, and he's kind of seen as this outsider cult author today, but most of his books were published by Dutton. They were like mainstream. They were
Yeah.
mystery novels. It wasn't like, he wrote 50 books that never saw the
Right.
light of day. Like, they were promoted. He was an editor at two magazines. So, um, I, I'm trying to think. So my friend David interviewed me for Bomb, and I think we actually went into it a little bit more, and it was cut for space because it was a very long interview.
Of course.
Um, but I'm trying to think of something he was saying. Like,
Does he have a Substack with all the cut parts in it? Like you're.
he doesn't. No, he's not a Luddite, but he's very he's got a great literary mind. Like, he's a whole other story. But I think one of the things we touched on was, I mean, kind of the Arcades project and the kind of archival project, and the way in a book like this, like Same Bed, especially one that takes a long time, you're kind of digging into your own personal archives. And so, one of the things that happens is that in the long course of writing this book, you kind of follow where your interests kind of lead, and where the narrative energy leads. And so that's how, like, all that. But we talked at the beginning about the Buffalo Sabres,
Yeah.
and I kind of, I played hockey growing up, and I followed not just the Sabres, but like every team. And so it's kind of like you mentioned a name from like the 70s, like a hockey player, and I kind of like it rings a bell.
Yeah.
So I kind of like dug into that, and I had actually written about Taro Tsujimoto, who was a phantom figure, did
Right.
not exist, but was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres in '74.
Right.
And, he's fascinated me I think I first tried to write about him, back in the early '90s. And I was like, wait a second, what happens if he's real? What happens if I put him in the book?
Yeah.
And it just like stimulated a whole, like it was really, no, I'm not saying like I want to take 9 years to write my next book. And there's definitely frustrations involved when you're spending so long trying to write the book that, you think is within you.
Hmm.
But I think the good thing is you kind of get some deeper material, and um, things resonate in a way that you couldn't have predicted. And that's sort of, to connect it to the idea of the Arcades project and like my own personal archive, if you will.
Yeah, your parchive. Yeah,
My
I
parchives, that's
can't,
right.
and your, I don't know how you ever stopped writing the thing,
Yeah.
because your interests seem to be without boundary. I mean, of the few things that I went back and read that weren't, that you had published well before this book. I
Yeah.
read your piece in the New Yorker on Squid Game,
Yeah.
and connected, and about the K dramas, and then the kind of, what was it, the explosion that happened with Park Chan Wook
Yeah,
and
sure.
other figures, and then I read about Dungeons and Dragons. You're writing about Dungeons and Dragons, and how, earlier in your life you came into touch with the game, and as I doesn't seem doesn't surprise me at all. You got fascinated by the sort of reams of rules and
Yeah.
histories, and you had these reference books and so on. But then, you're writing about Yi Song, and then you have this wonderful commonplace book essay in
Oh,
Lapham's
right.
Quarterly, and it just seems to
Yeah.
me your interests your curiosity has no bounds, and you just seem like someone who can dig into and find gold in just about everything. And it's just like, how do you ever stop? Like, how do you say, okay, I've got to stop because the book is never going to end?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I did incorporate everything you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like, I think I incorporated to some degree, but there are definitely parts. One of the things in writing the book within the book, same bed, different dreams, same bed, comma, different dreams.
Hmm.
I, I one of the things in my mind was like, if I were telling somebody who didn't really know much about Korean history, if I wanted to get them interested, what are the things that I would tell them about? So there's a lot of that in there, but there are also several things that are not in there, and which I had read about years ago, and that in some cases maybe had tried to write about before. And part of me was like, I gotta include it. But then there's a realization like, the book is long enough, and if you embark on this path with this, let me try to think of an example. There's this thing called the Silk Letter that one of I think in 1801. I don't want to get into the whole history of Catholicism in Korea, but it you know there were Catholics in Korea. There was no priest there, but they were trying to get a priest in China to come help them,
Yeah.
to rescue them because they were being persecuted. And so he wrote this letter. I think it's like 13,000 characters in
Oh my
Chinese. This
goodness.
is a Korean Catholic on this very small piece of silk, and sewed it into his servant's uh, coat. And the servant was going to pass into China and deliver it, etc. Anyway, I put it actually in my first novel, unpublished novel, back in
Oh,
the
I
90s.
was like, wait, I don't remember
Yeah,
that
no,
in
you wouldn't
personal
have read, you
days.
wouldn't have read it. But it's sort of like, I could have found a way to put it in the book,
Hmm.
but would it be worth it? It would be another like couple months of work, and like maybe it would just add too much. So there are definitely a few of those that I can think of, and maybe that is, I'm already thinking like maybe this is like something I put in the next book. But once I realized that there was a book called Same Bed, Different Dreams, in which all these historical things could kind of come to life. It was very exciting, but it was also like I had to kind of set limits. So,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I want to seize on something you said
stuff.
right there
Yeah,
because you're saying I like the way that you're saying even though this would have been really cool and evocative and kind of piqued a lot of interest, the type of writer you are, you just expressed that if I introduce this, I'm gonna have to put like an infrastructure around it. I can't just drop it in,
yeah,
and I like that, and I want to highlight that because I feel like people who haven't read the book but have read about it, or maybe listening to his talk and haven't read it, or
yeah,
some of the other things that I've read, could get the sense that it's just a big dumping ground of all of these cool things you've gathered, like all of these
right,
trinkets or
right, right.
bric-a-brac that you've gathered.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
not to, I hate to bring this up because it's a sort of negative, but it's also false. So I bring it up. But
Okay.
in the Washington Post review, the
Uh-huh.
Parker Jotter thread, I believe, is referred to as the odds and ends drawer of your
Huh.
novel. And you may not have read that, so I'm sorry to bring it up, but
Yeah. No, I definitely read it, but yes, go on.
like what I want to point out is that I suspect that that particular reviewer only read the book once. And
Yeah.
I want to assert that decidedly it is not. There is nothing that is just an
Right.
odd or an end or just kind of showcasing these cool
Hmm.
facts. Like, it's not an encyclopedia of the cool things that Ed Park has encountered over the last couple
Right,
of
right,
decades.
right.
Everything is tied together and deliberately woven into the
Yeah.
story. There's nothing I can think of. Like I said on the first read, there were puzzle pieces laying on my table,
Yeah,
so to
yeah.
speak, that I was then able to fit together the second time because there just is so much in there. But I mean, I honestly cannot fathom walking away from this book and just saying, this is just a collection of neat
Yeah.
ideas. It is all everything that you introduce, you do craft and weave in there. Like you
Yeah.
are very aware there is an audience who hasn't lived the life I have read. There's an audience
Right,
that
right.
doesn't have the context of having grown up hearing this saying of the title itself.
Yeah, yeah.
I need to make this thing. And I mean, you're a teacher, you're a critic, you're an editor, like you've
Yeah.
worn so many hats that I don't think you are capable of producing like an odds and ends drawer because you're
Right.
so
I
aware
mean,
of
and I don't think anyone would publish an odds and ends drawer, to be
yeah. I'm
honest. Like
trying to think.
it's sort of um but I you mentioned, I have been a book editor and edited shorter things as well, but you do want to make whatever it is, a novel or an article or a short story, like you want to make it there has to be this a level of accessibility,
Yeah.
right? So without, dumbing down and that would be one end, and without like having it be an info dump, you have to figure out a way um, to weave things together, to know what to leave out, and just, I mean, I think, I don't want to harp on the comic novel aspect of it, but I think humor is a way to, if something's funny, that can string the reader along for another couple
Definitely.
pages, right? And there are even some. I feel like there's some, comic set pieces and things like that. Um, but the question was like, how do you do that, and also like get at some very serious, tragic, even events
Hmm.
and episodes in history. How do you make the reader understand them, but also like feel them, and how they affect the characters in the novel, both the historical figures who emerge as characters, and the ones that I just made up. So yeah, it's I mean, I guess if it were easy, everybody would just AI would
Yeah.
just be
Yeah.
pumping out these novels.
Sure.
It's funny when I was finished, like this was like well before sort of ChatGPT kind of came out, and I think I said to a friend like, well, I all I can say is like AI could not have written this book, and it's there's a way of, I mean, not to credit myself too much, but there you as an author you have to make these decisions of in terms of not just the line by line writing and the references and allusions and stuff, but like also the structure. And it's, hopefully, despite the different threads, like when you jump to a new thread, there's like an energy there that keeps you reading. But as an author, you have to like, I have so many, outlines and things where I'm like trying to figure out how to structure this thing. And it's really like, sometimes you try and fail. A lot of times you try and fail. And I won't go into it, but there are many earlier versions of this that did not work. And it's kind of like banging your head against the wall until it's like, oh wait, the book within the book is going to be about the Korean provisional government, and then that gives you some runway. And then oh wait, I need this character Parker Jotter, and actually this is all going to be about his life, and then that gives you fresh inspiration. So it's really there's no there's no roadmap, although
Yeah.
along the way I keep trying to come up with them.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go back to gloat.
Yeah.
It's such a rich symbol for our current sort of technocracy. For starters, I love that it's a verb that means sort of to draw attention to one's fortunes, usually in
Right.
such a way to where you are, condescending to others. And throughout the book, I had a lot of fun listing out all of the real companies that it seems gloat has taken
Oh,
over.
okay.
And I only wrote it down if I had like there was an actual detail that seemed
Yeah.
really like that particular company. But Google for sure, Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, eBay, eHarmony, Bitcoin, 23andMe, LinkedIn, Fitbit, Roomba, Ancestry, and Alexa
Yeah.
are all the ones that I noted that seem to be in
Yeah.
there. The satirical mode that you operate in for some of this always brings with it, of course, a resistance to its subject. Only by going off the grid can one enter true history, appears to us on page 1. And then at another point we read, once you stop dwelling on your own small history, you can grasp the working of the world. And then Soon and Nora Sheen's adopted daughter, whose name is Story, says that dreams are everything that's not online. One of my favorite lines in the book.
Oh, thank you.
And then when Soon asks the Alexa-like Tolga device, its name also an anagram of gloat, by the
That's
way,
right.
what history is, and I didn't come up with that, it's in the book. Uh, he asks, what is history to Tolga? And this is what you write. The silver pyramid was pensive, blue light swirling. At last it said, sorry, I can't help you at the moment. One of the pivotal revelations of the story involves both Parker Jotter's dime store paperbacks and, decades later, a 3D printer, which to me sort of represented this interesting cycle or attraction and resistance from the physical world to the digital world and then back again to the physical world. In terms of technological advancement, there does seem to be sort of an excitement and an apprehension present in the book.
Yeah, for sure. Personal Days, my first novel was an office satire, and in a lot of ways, this began as kind of Personal Days 2.0, like that kind of satiric energy applied to you know the technology, the apps, all these services that we embrace or we resent, that they impinge upon our lives. If we don't use them, that's a choice. And so there's a surface level where I was just having fun with it, and
Yeah,
we've all had these frustrations, and hopefully it's relatable. Like you ask,
absolutely.
actually lately, I have the Amazon Echo in the other room, and sometimes it just starts talking, like telling me about stuff, and I haven't said a word. So there's also an element of the uncanny, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, especially for people who are not, I'm not a tech savvy guy necessarily, but like, how do these things work? What do they know about us? It's all
Yeah.
like we attribute all these things to them. So it's I think it's like really fertile ground to play with. And so that's going on. But I love that you brought up all these things that it reminded you of. I think Gloat, Instagram was sort of probably the model for me, in the first place. Like,
Hmm.
just, I mean, I use it too. It's like the only social media I use,
Yeah.
but there is that kind of like bragging that
Yeah.
goes on there, like gloating.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm innocent of it, but it just seemed like the perfect name for that. And then I
Yeah.
was like, there's something about putting it in all capital letters. I was like, it should be all embracing. So
Yes.
you can buy stuff on it, you can meet your partner on it, you can adopt a kid on it. Like that's obviously like I made that up, but
And there's currency involved, and they're called
and there's
gloatables.
currency
I
collectibles.
love
That
that.
actually used to be a much bigger part of the book, and I was like so confused. Like I didn't. It partly stems from like not quite understanding crypto, so I was just like, I'll just kind of throw it in there.
That's great.
But I think the second layer is just like how can these things like intersect and interact with each other, but also like it should move the plot. So
Hmm.
without giving stuff away, and I think you alluded to some of these moments, like they a couple plot points, turn on the way something like a gloat service functions or
Yeah.
3D printing.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned Parker Jotter's paperbacks 2333, and there's like 3D printing involved, and there's a video game involved. There's
Yes.
also like in the 70s, there's a role playing game that is
Uh-huh.
kind of devised. That was actually kind of one of the later chapters I wrote because I needed something that would connect gaming, like
Yeah, that
as
was
we
a
know it in
great
games,
hinge.
to
Yeah.
to like Pulp Fiction, and that one takes place fully in New York, where I live in New York City, and so kind of in my neighborhood. Um, but well, just kind of like I guess what am I trying to say? Like threading this this idea of an entertainment, like a science fiction novel, through these different eras
Hmm.
and technological variations, and then also, you know, at at some level tying it back to you know some of the stuff I'm talking about in terms of Korea and the Korean War and that whole
Yeah.
history. So that's the challenge. It's also you could frame it a different way, like how, I wasn't alive during the Korean War, but it's something I think about,
Hmm.
something I've read a lot about. But how do I bring that to a audience in the 2020s who
Yeah.
it's already, you know, 70 plus years since it started. Like how do you make that engaging? And I think maybe one idea was like use things that are familiar to us
Mm.
now to kind of like get at that history.
Well, you really did it. I mean, because I mean, for me, you had me going down all kinds of rabbit holes. Starting with Wikipedia, and suddenly I have 27 tabs open
Yeah, it's
that
like
your book has spawned.
Wikipedia is dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes I'm looking just to see if it's real or made up. That's a fun game to
Right.
play with your book, real or made up. But yeah, in terms of the history, Korean history, going all the way back to 2333 and then moving forward.
Yeah.
And the Korean War, because certainly I saw it as something, that was sort of, I mean, this sounds horrible, but just personally, I don't remember ever being taught anything about the Korean War.
Yeah, at most it's a page in a history
Yeah,
textbook, right?
so I
Yeah.
kind of knew it as this, what, episode that flared up at the end of World War II, lasted a couple of years. I know there are
Right.
Korean War vets, but I don't really know anything else. And then, of course, everything else I know is just the stuff that media feeds
Yeah.
mostly about North Korea and so on. And so your book does an excellent job, very effective at bringing me in and educating me, honestly. But also the feeling is there. So it's not just an intellectual education, like you really do. And that's what
Right.
great novels do. Is you're awakening me to stuff I don't know about, but then
Right.
actually helping it get into my feelings so that it's not just something I'm learning
Yeah.
and educating myself about, but something that I'm actually starting to get compelled to care about,
Oh,
and
great.
realize that it really, there's a whole population of people that it deeply affects.
Yeah. And we everyone has a sense of South Korea versus North Korea
Yeah,
today,
yeah,
right? We know Kim Jong Un, and like
hmm,
this kind of we have this image of this very repressive, uh, you know,
definitely,
uh,
yeah,
dynasty going on there.
yeah,
And South Korea, you have this impression of K-dramas and BTS,
yeah,
K-pop,
yeah,
stuff like that. But it's also like, how did it get that way? Like
yeah,
it's there. It's we all kind of know it to some
yeah,
level. So I'm fascinated by it. You know, as maybe a lot of people are, but also just the idea that it's still that's kind of the dichotomy in the American imagination.
yeah,
And I think that, but for me it's like tracing it back, like,
hmm,
well, it's like that because there was the Korean War that my parents lived through. And I think one thing I'll say, and this is also true about the Buffalo stuff, is I guess I'm trying to like I don't know if memorialize is the right word, but
hmm,
like kind of put a flag in the ground a bit for that event in history, maybe Korean history, modern Korean history in general. Um, being an immigrant, I was born in Buffalo, but my parents are immigrants.
hmm,
Being Korean in a pretty, pretty white
yeah,
city, and
yeah,
yet, loving the city in a lot of ways, in the 70s and 80s, like my cousin who grew up with me read it, and he was like he he's like he understood it. He was like, you captured what it was like to be at
wow, yeah,
there then. And it
hmm,
wasn't my intent to write an autobiographical fiction. And soon Sheen starts out with some of the biographical info that I have, but it's like he completely different in 75% of his life. Um, but I think it was a way to talk about that
yeah,
stuff in a way that Personal Days really did not do at all. Like I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
delve into anything Korea related, in the least. So
yeah. That's true. I'm sitting here
this seemed
thinking
like the
through it.
place to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it's great because it's personal. Even though
yeah,
Personal Days, it's called
right.
Personal Days.
More like impersonal
Right,
days.
right, exactly.
These,
Which of course they're playing on, taking well, it's kind of funny.
yeah,
There's like this loophole in the HR system where they suddenly realize they get these personal days, but no one's really tracking them.
right, right.
But yeah, the
Yeah.
for you, the Ed Park Personal Days is the second novel.
Is this?
And
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
love that because yeah, when something's personal and you're working through who you are and what has shaped your family, and on top of everything else you've got going on, it keeps it close to the heart too. And
yeah, yeah. I think that's along with the humor, like that's sort of an engine,
yeah.
within the novel. Yeah.
All right, well, let's do a couple of quick sort of confirm or deny questions.
Okay.
If for anything else, just my own amusement. But like we talked
Sure.
about, that very first title we encounter is 2333 The Scholars, which to
Yeah.
me immediately made me think of 2666 and its opening part, the part about the critics, who are also
Huh.
scholars.
Yeah.
We will, of course, find out that 2333 has a couple of other meanings in your book, but I mean, I felt like you had to have had Bologna in mind
Oh,
to
sure.
some degree, and especially as 2666 itself is kind of unveiling this secret history that's buried, to use a horrible double entendre, in Mexico.
Yeah. When I hit upon the date 2333, no spoilers, of course, being the the kind of reader of what literary fiction, translated fiction that I am, I was like 2333, 2666.
Yeah.
So that was yeah, it's definitely a nod to Bolaño. I don't know that I was conscious of the part about the critics. I also think the funny thing about 2666 is you know how every Friends episode is like the one about.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind
Oh
of think about
yeah.
that with 2666. It'd be funny if Bologna was like, "This is a Friends reference."
I didn't
Um,
think about that. Yeah.
but yeah, so there's a that's definitely a you know, I didn't want to get too uh, cutesy or meta, but you
Yeah.
know, I can't help it. There's a reference to a Hotel Sontag. That's a real hotel
Yes. I
in
thought
Seoul of the time.
I immediately when I read that I thought, oh, that's the nod to Susan Sontag. But then I looked
Definitely,
it up and I was like, oh,
it's a
it's
real
real.
place. Yeah, it was an important place, but you know, it came up in stuff that I was reading. It's like I got to put it in. You know, Sontag, you know, is an important writer.
Oh,
Kind of like more her criticism than
yeah.
her fiction, but I think there's also like a General Murakami or something. But that was like a real name, and I'm like, I got to throw Murakami in there. I'm sure there are some others, but you know, I wanted it for like people like you, like
Oh,
you'll
I
get
love
it,
it.
and hopefully
Yeah.
you'll savor it. And if people don't get it, that's fine. The story
Yeah,
still can
exactly.
move along. Yeah,
Yeah. You've done it in such a way to where you don't have to know it. Yeah,
right,
to put
right.
things together. But yeah, so thank you for all of the Easter
Yeah,
eggs.
of course.
On page 108, you're right. Leon does more detailed work with a finer title, but for the same pay. And then parenthetically, you say, there should be a word for this. And having just read Personal Days, I thought, is this an allusion to the term deprotion?
It was very much an
Okay.
allusion to that. And I think maybe I don't know if this is true, but maybe in an early draft I had put in Deprotion, like as
Okay.
another shout out to Personal Days,
Yeah.
but I took it out.
Oh, perfect. I love
I
that.
also just I'll quickly add Deprotion. So my editor for Personal Days, editor named Julia Chaffetz, she came up with that word while reading the manuscript, and I was like, "Can I put it put it in the book?" So that's her word, and she also came up with the title because I'd been working on it with a different working title, which was Time Remaining, which was something on my page sheets. It would say Time Remaining, and she was, but I was describing the book to her, and she's like, Personal Days, and it's an interesting thing where she hadn't even read it yet, but and it was not clear that she would be my editor. We were just talking, but I loved the title so much that I then kind of worked it in quite a bit into the novel itself, so that you know there's a book within the book called Personal
Yep.
Daze, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah,
I hear, it's funny. You're the third person in this little series that I'm doing.
yeah,
Uh, and there's these common threads where Adam Levin, Debbie Urbanski, and now you, Ed Park, all at some point, if not multiple times, talk about sort of that collaboration with the editor that takes
yeah.
place. And it just seems like such an important part of the process and how, bring kind of the gestation of the book and then bringing the first drafts into existence, is
Yeah,
on that person alone in the room filled with sheets of paper. But then it's like you partner up, if you're lucky, you partner
right,
up with
right.
a good editor and it becomes a sort of collaboration.
Yeah, it's you know I should also I mean for both the books, but especially with this one, my agent, a guy named PJ Mark was. I mean, you can imagine there was another draft that was even longer where he was like, very gently was like, and just having his, when I then sent him this version several years later, he got it, and then he was like, I'll just this is kind of insider stuff, but
Sure.
my original editor at Random House for this book left, which often happens, and so PJ was like trying to think who we could work with there, and I lucked out. Andy Ward is my editor there, who he's George Saunders' editor. He's just great, and I will say, like, going through the book, I will remember distinctly, like, he had the printout, his note, handwritten notes, and we just kind of going through it, and I wouldn't say it was prescriptive. He wasn't like,
Hmm.
you should need to do this, but he kind of asked these questions. And so there was a chapter I alluded to, one of the later chapters I wrote, but that comes up before the halfway point. It's called Harmony Holdings.
Uh-huh.
Chapter 7, it comes up on page 157. So that's the one set in 1977.
Yeah.
in New York City, a game design company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't that Andy was like, "You need this kind of chapter here," but it was more like the questions he was asking made me sense that there was a gap in the flow of that thread. If I'm not mixing too many metaphors, and then I kind of had this separate idea for a story, and I was like, wait, this actually should be in this book, and so that was sort of I like that kind of collaboration a lot, and I've been on the other end of it as a book editor,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you're prescriptive, and sometimes there's like a ton of line editing,
Yeah.
and other times you're like, you maybe you need something that I can't articulate, but you know you need something more, and you kind of leave it to the author to fill in.
On page 284, Soon answers the phone. Yellow. Is this possibly an allusion to Hal's phone calls with his older brother in Infinite Jest? I know it's
Uh,
slightly different where they go, yellow, but
I will say that in the 90s, people did jokingly answer the phone that way pre-Infinite Jest. But
okay.
when you now that you mentioned Infinite Jest, yes, I do remember that. That was not a conscious nod to it.
Okay.
I think for me, it was more like this idea of yellow, as in, um, a color that is associated with
And they
Asians,
do
and
go immediately into that. He says something like, is that a yellow
yeah.
power thing or something like
Yes, exactly.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's this wonderful writer, Don Lee, who has a book called Yellow, a book of fiction.
Oh,
So
oh no,
yeah,
never mind. Sorry, I was thinking of a different
it
one.
wasn't an allusion to him either, but it was more like feeling like that would be something he would that would be a way Soon would answer the phone.
Got it.
That could lead to a conversation. Yeah.
On page 259, an aging Parker Jotter confusedly calls his attacker Joe Christmas. Is this an allusion to Faulkner's Light in August?
You are the second person to catch that.
Yes.
The
I'll
first
take number
person
two.
is you'll take number two.
Ah,
You're in good
second
company.
place.
The only other person to pick up on that is a writer named Il-Yun Wu, a friend of mine who just won the Pulitzer for her book uh, Master Slave Husband Wife.
Okay.
And she was like, "This is Faulkner, right?" Yes, that was definitely
Excellent.
a Faulkner reference.
Okay.
And that the yeah, that we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, and then lastly, are there any Easter eggs in your book that you're aware of but that no one has discovered yet?
I think the Joe Christopher one, sorry, Joe Christmas one.
Yeah.
Joseph Christopher was
Yeah.
the name of the real life killer. That was kind of the one I thought more people would pick up on. I think there are a lot of Easter
Okay.
eggs that haven't been mentioned.
And I'm not asking you to tell us, of course, what it is, but is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
one?
there
Is there one that you kind of put in there and you're waiting for that person?
for that
Yeah.
that person to gosh, uh, yes.
Challenge
I
accepted.
think there's, yeah, challenge accepted. I feel like there are Easter eggs kind of around, like in Dream Five, like some of the stuff, kind of suburban pop culture stuff that threads its. I don't know if they're Easter eggs, but I think at one point I mentioned these bands, Asia, Journey, and Foreigner,
Mm-hmm.
which were all big bands when I was growing up. And I don't know if that's an Easter egg, but it kind of like I feel like it resonates on a level beyond like I always thought, when the band Asia came out,
Yeah.
they were actually this super group composed of people from Yes and different groups like that. I kind of was hoping like somebody would be Asian in it, and it was far from the case.
Well, now
Um,
the lead singer of Journey.
is Yes, exactly, yes, yeah. So it's all connected. Yeah, the lead singer of Journey is from the Philippines. I mean, one thing that I kind of well, this is total tangent, but like Queen and Van Halen were also huge
Mm-hmm.
bands back then who I liked, and I don't think I knew that Freddie Mercury was Indian, and I didn't know that Eddie Van Halen his mother's from Indonesia,
Yeah.
and Alex Van Halen too, obviously.
Nor I.
So, this I at some time
Huh.
point during the construction of this book, I was aware of this, but I did not put it in. I will mention one thing in a chapter called Amsterdam in the 80s. There's a figure like a hipster who drops a thumb drive.
Yes. Yes.
And my son, my older son Duncan, read the novel. He's 16, and he had this like, he was like, "Oh, is that guy this other character?" And I actually had not thought of that, and I thought of it for a while. I was like, "Yeah, I think I think it is." So I think he made a connection that I hadn't actually made before. Oh, the other, oh, I might as well tell one Easter egg.
Okay.
But maybe you got it. There's a character in 2333 named Greena Hymns.
Sing memory.
Um, yeah, okay, so you got it. So
Well, you
there's I
actually
think,
you tell that
do I
in the
not to,
book.
I tell that later.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I don't think I
There,
would have gotten that one because Greena Hymns just seems
yeah,
so like a character
so
name
weird.
from a
Yeah.
sci-fi dime store paperback, and I love that name, Greena Hymns. And I think you
Um,
characterize her with the white hair and the look, and
Wait, okay,
to
good. All
where it
right.
just
So she's
I didn't catch it at all, and you said
I,
it in the
I
book.
guess I was like, oh wait, this is way too, obscure, so I'll highlight that. There's also stuff with like kind of family tree stuff where Clara,
Yes,
how she connects to
yes. I'm looking for my.
Sood in some way in
Yeah,
a
I had
interesting way.
to on my second read. I did a little sort of
Did you do a little
genealogical,
family tree? Okay,
yeah,
great. Okay, you got it.
and
Yeah.
then I finally
Um,
realized who Nora's parents are.
oh,
Nora's
good.
team.
All right. Good. We'll leave it at that.
Okay,
But that was something where I was like, I wanted
that was
people to
good.
get it,
That was
but
good.
like have a, not immediately, like kind of later be like, oh
Oh, I
wait,
didn't get
that's
it the
how
first time.
that relates.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was on my second
Perfect.
read that it hinged on Euphrates
Oh, good.
because
Okay. Just as I planned.
the that was one of those markers that I noticed and
Yeah.
Monk Zingapan.
Well, I
I
think,
was like,
you brought up,
okay,
yeah. I mean, Pynchon gets, he's famous for his names, and people are
yeah,
like,
yeah,
these are crazy names. But I think the reason he has these names is that you remember,
yeah,
right? In
exactly. They
this sort
stand
of very
out. Hmm.
complex, yeah.
And when you've got
Um,
so many characters, like when you've got 100 characters in a novel, they've
yeah,
they've got to have something. Unless you're
they've
writing
got
a
to
South
stand out.
American novel, in which case, good luck.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
A lot of them like I think like Gabriel Garcia Marquez
Oh,
likes
sure.
the,
100 Years of Solitude.
yeah, this
Yeah,
is like the ambiguity is part of
it's part of
the
it,
culture.
right? The
But
the
yeah,
repetitions, definitely.
all right. So
Um,
yeah, I'd love for you to read a selection from the book, just so people can hear the
sure.
author reading it.
Sure. So part four, Dream Four, occurs somewhere in the page 300. So a lot of it's about the Korean War, and I will just read the last two sections, 96, and the sections are numbered, so
Yeah.
it's 96 and 97. 96, Hull. Parker Jotter is the first black member of the Korean Provisional Government. After Parker's death in 1993, it's Hank Woods, his most faithful correspondent, who continues the vast work building upon wild wording. So this was one of the books that Parker Jotter has been working on, but it's not science fiction. It's like a writer's manual, and it becomes like an MFA program guide, I
Yes.
guess. In 2000, he writes that the trail of black dots in Yi Sang's 1934 poem, Diagnosis, predicts both North Korea's incursion across the 38th parallel, June 25th, 1990, and the diagonal path of Brett Hull's shot, June 20th, 1999, moving from the top left of the crease to the right portion of the net. Hank Woods believes that he has uncovered important connections between events across decades, but he has difficulty persuading others to see it that way, or to see it at all. He prepares a videotape showing the fateful goal from overhead, the same 30 seconds looped. He copies out relevant passages from wild wording, sends them to the media. He poses a question: can it truly be a coincidence that the brothers who started the Buffalo Sabres hockey franchise, Seymour and Northrop Knox, had the initials SK and NK, as in South and North Korea? Hank Woods dies in 2001, convinced until the end that the whole story has not been told. Then we have a little picture of sadly, the goal, Brett Hull's goal, it's like a Sabaldian,
Yeah.
very fuzzy gray picture of the goal going into the net, and then 97 goal. So ends Dream 4 of the Korean Provisional Government.
And with that, you altered the way that I'll always see Yi Song's poem now. When I see that grid of
Yeah,
numbers
dots
with
through a
the
grid.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
now I can't help but see the imagine the puck, in the hockey game, and also
right.
the dividing line at the 38th parallel. So
Yeah,
very strong, like multiple layered images that you've superimposed there
yeah. Thank
to
you.
make it stick. And that also showcased one of the things that I immediately looked up when you said the founders or of the Buffalo Sabres have
Yeah,
SK and NK as their initials, and it's true.
it is true.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
was like, oh, come on, he stretched this, and sure enough, there it is. And
No, I was always, as a kid, my father goes by SK Park, and I always was like,
whoa,
SK, South Korea.
uh,
I just kind of made this illogical association. But anyway, yes, there were the Knox brothers, a very famous family in Buffalo. Those were their initials, and it was too good not to put it
it's
in
excellent.
to bolster my weird claim of the Sabres, the Sabres Stars game being an analog for the Korean War.
Yeah. Well, Ed, you have done something that is becoming increasingly rare. You have managed to publish a big, complex, formally inventive novel with a big publishing house, Random House. I've got several friends who have literary whoppers they are struggling to place at even mid tier publishers because no one wants to take a chance on marketing them to a reading public that would, by and large, rather consume literary chiclets, to borrow the analogy from
Yeah.
Jonathan Franzen, though I think he was talking about music and like how
Okay.
now music is like 3.5
Little.
minute sound bites
Yeah, yeah.
compared to what it used to be, and it loses its flavor very quickly, little chiclets. But what advice do you have for these writers?
Gosh, I don't know that I have anything practical. I can only tell you sort of my path, and which is that I wrote two very long novels, at least as long as Same Bed, Different Dreams, in my 20s, and they didn't get published. So it
So you
has
did
all like
market that you did send them out. You tried to get them published.
yes. So the first one, it went out with an agent, a different agent than I'm using now, and she gave it. She really tried, and I think it went to like maybe even 20 different editors, and most were just polite no's. A couple of them like dug into it. It was, but it's hard for us to break this kind of book out. So I guess what I'm saying is it's always been thus, and you and me, like, we think of the recognitions, and we think
Yeah.
of Gravity's Rainbow and stuff like that. um, those were rare even then. It's not like there, every year there were tons of these kind of challenging
That's a good point.
postmodern books. Um, for better or worse, like, I like all kinds of books, to be
Hmm.
honest. I read a lot of genre books. I read a lot of, uh, you know, I used to read a lot of P.G. Woodhouse.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of stuff I like, and there are a lot of different writers maybe I could have been, or like
Mm.
literary careers that, if I could write mysteries, I would write them, let's say. But there's something about, these books, DeLillo, Pynchon, Infinite Jest, you mentioned, like, there's something about them that it's almost like the idea of them is so powerful
Yeah.
that I can't help but write in that way.
Hmm.
Personal Days was a very short book, but like you can see, it changes its
Oh yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
There's like all this wordplay and illusion. Um, so there's like, I can only kind of write the book that I can write, and selling it and marketing it. I'm, I had a book that was published, Personal Days, that, it got some attention, and the reviews were all actually really good,
Hmm.
and so, but it wasn't like, I don't think, people were waiting around at Random House being like, when is Park going to deliver the follow-up? Many years passed, 15 years
Yeah.
passed, right,
Yeah.
between these two books. So that's like an eternity.
Right.
And, part of me is just glad that people didn't forget who I was, right? And I guess I would say I've had a unusual path in that, I'm fairly old at this point, and I've worked at a lot of different places. I've worked as a reviewer, right? You mentioned some of the reviews I wrote.
Hmm.
Also a book review editor. I've worked at magazines and newspapers. I've worked in publishing houses. Um, so there's kind of like I've just been around, and I'm a little bit maybe too dismissive about those two books that I wrote in my 20s, I guess,
Hmm.
in the 1990s. Um, but it's not like I tried any less,
Hmm.
and it's not like kind of the heartbreak is just as profound, right? Even then.
Yeah.
But I think I've just been around enough, and I think I've also, I've been writing a lot about books that I've had um, the opportunity to write about books that I'm interested in and that are
Hmm.
important to me, and hopefully, I actually I don't know if that has anything to do with being able to publish this book, but it really is sort of having written it and having a really it's kind of a brilliant agent
Hmm.
who is not shy about literary fiction, and uh, you know an editor who like got so Andy Ward, who saw this kind of late in the game, right after like a second huge draft revision, um, like he got it. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I my first book was with them. Uh, like I said, I don't know that there's any practical advice I can give, but I think there is something to. It would have been very easy in some ways for me to just, after writing those two novels that never got picked up, to just say, clearly,
Uh-huh.
I am not going to publish a novel, and
Yep.
I think it's okay to say that too. But what else? What else am I going to do? So
Yeah, I really appreciate you pointing that out, because I think that for someone who has poured themselves out into a novel over a number of years,
yeah,
and they've just labored over it, here we can cue that image of Charles Fort and Walter Benjamin
right,
and everyone else, Yisong with the in a room with papers everywhere, and and then to be rejected over and over and
yeah,
over.
yeah,
I think that takes quite a toll, because it's hard for it not to be personal. As a
yeah,
writer, you are pouring yourself out, and then to over years and years of your life. So I think it is really important for you that you brought up those first two novels,
yeah,
because people see you now on this side of your career. They don't see the Ed Park that got rejected by 20 different
yeah,
places. So
yeah,
for you, you had to go through that experience then of, hey, I've got these two, not once, but twice.
yeah,
Uh, and then, I think that's kind of like you pointed out, that's kind of a make or break. Are you going to are you going to put those two aside and say, hey, that's what, 10 years of my life, that I'm
right,
putting
right,
aside, and I'm going to start, here's the next one, maybe this is the
yeah.
novel, or do I need to seriously think about a career change, or whatever? I
Yeah,
think it's
I guess, I mean,
important.
one thing I would add, there are also like a couple other books that, I started and wrote a lot and never kind of got to the end of. But one thing I just thought of is short stories. So I did have you know, some success publishing short stories over the years.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know, like writers are funny, right? Like somebody likes a story you wrote. It's like, oh, maybe I am a writer. Maybe I do have something that people want to read. And so, um, you know, actually, I should add, I have a book of stories coming out next
Oh,
year. So
yeah.
these are like stories over about 25 years. And the funny thing is, like, I think the first story in the collection is like the first one that I published. And I like it. Like, it's very short, but it's like, there's nothing in this story that I would feel ashamed of today. Like I would love to write this story now. Um, and certain themes and obsessions come up, and a lot of them are quite funny, and some of them are uncanny. But I think there was a way, this is perhaps a different topic, but something should be said about the way a writer engages with the short story form and the novel form, because sometimes you just need to write a story
Yeah.
and feel like you can do it, and that you've mastered a voice even just for a little while.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I should have thought of this earlier, but that over the years, like, publishing stories has been helpful to my mental health.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like because you can get that affirmation from an
Yeah.
external party, and it kind
Yeah,
of confirms,
exactly.
like, oh, I can do this. Like, people are
Right.
interested in this. It's just
Right,
you're
right.
narrowing down. You're doing a smaller, more concentrated form, and kind of
Yeah.
building that portfolio to use kind of a reductive word, but nonetheless.
Yeah. I think another thing, I mean, I'm on Instagram, but I think there's a way in which you get deluged with, all these writers and books and stuff, and you just feel like there's so many books. Why,
Yes.
I don't know if that's like a thing like that will help you think that, oh, I can do it too, or if it just feels like I have no chance, like,
Yeah.
all these other people are doing it.
Yeah, right.
So,
Like everybody's getting published except for me. Yeah.
and I would add that did not exist in the 90s.
Yeah,
So I
right.
was a little bit insulated from that. Um, maybe for the better, but
Yeah.
you kind of just had your own work, and you didn't really have this sort of,
I didn't consider that. Yeah.
minute by minute updates on what the rest of the world is doing. So
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that's
Yeah.
going to be extremely helpful for people.
I hope so.
Because some of these I know this is quality work. It's just, like you said,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of, it's always been more difficult because the stakes are higher for everyone across the board the longer and more complex the book is. I mean, even down to the
Right.
printing costs and so on. And just
Of
for the
course.
record, I would gratefully purchase and read the 1,000 page edition of Same Bad Different Dreams. All right, well, we are at the end here, and what I like to do in this series is end it with a selfish question and just ask you, just from our talk and what you've gathered about me and so on, what is one book? It doesn't represent your favorite book of all time by any means. I would never ask you to answer
Sure.
that question, that impossible question, but just one book you get a sense that you think I should read right away.
Wow. Okay. Well, let me ask, what's your familiarity with W.G. Sebald? Have you read?
I've read The Immigrants, Austerlitz, Rings of Saturn.
Okay, so that's
Sebald
basically
is
it. I think
wonderful, yeah.
Okay, so let's put him aside.
Okay.
There's a book by a Korean author named Lee Ki-ho, or E Ki-ho, that Dalkey put out in their Korean fiction line.
Now we're talking.
And it's called At Least We Can Apologize.
At least we can apologize.
It's about 200 pages.
Okay.
If you're at all like a fan of absurdist humor, if you are into sort of the funnier Beckett, or
Yes.
do you know Agatha Christoph, The Notebook?
I
Her
have
her
not read
Notebook
it.
trilogy?
Yeah, the three book. I have not
Yeah.
read it, but I know that you
It's
reviewed it in New York
yeah,
Review of
she's
Books.
she's incredible. And anyway,
Okay.
or even if you just like exciting, funny, a kind of strange fiction, At Least We Can Apologize is, I just think it's so good. I wrote about it in the
Perfect.
New Yorker, and I kind of thought like people would, because it was essentially like, this is like the best, but nobody did it. Like, I don't think anybody's really read it. I thought maybe Dalkey would like repack, because like the Dalkey covers for those I just find so just kind of dreary. Like, they're just like pro form,
You're talking about the
they're not really.
essentials, the ones that they're reissuing, or the
No,
older
no,
ones?
I guess this is the earlier iteration.
yeah.
Like, it was just nothing.
Definitely
Anyway, whatever. But that's
definitely a
not even the
template.
problem. Like, I just thought like people should read this book. And I did an interview. I went to Korea and for a different reason, and I met E Ki Ho, and we later did an interview, which I can send you.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I asked him, like, he was just great to like hear about his writing methods and stuff. And one was he takes a nap before he starts to write, which I actually sometimes do now. and is most inspired by like American hip hop. So,
Interesting.
yeah, and I don't know how to describe it, but
What are
like
some of, did
just
he tell you
check.
some of his favorite American hip hop artists?
I'm trying to remember. I think they were like kind of '90s era hip hop.
Okay, like Tupac or
The Yeah, and the headline was straight out of Gangwon, which is a region in Korea. Um,
so West Coast
but
hip hop.
and he's like around my age. I think he might. We're about the same age. Um, but just read the first uh, chapter, first page,
I'll do
and
it.
you will know if you're in it. Because I think you will love it. And actually, if you could do something about him, because people should read him, and they
Yeah.
really don't.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I love it when I
Yeah.
get one of these I've never even heard of. So
Cool.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sounds great. And I feel like we've imparted enough of a sense about each other's reading taste to where
Right.
I
Right.
feel like you've probably zeroed in on something good.
I will just
I'm
briefly set it up like
yeah, go
no,
ahead.
it's from the point of view of these two, actually one guy narrating it, but it's like two people who work in it's some kind of like it's not a prison, but it might be some kind of mental institution where they're packing, like they're forced to like do labor and like packing socks and stuff like that.
Oh,
And
perfect.
maybe one of them writes a note or something. Anyway, there, but they set up a business where you can hire them to apologize for you. Anyway, it's totally absurd, but
Yeah,
very like very well done, and not super long.
sounds great. Well, Ed Park, I can't thank you enough for spending this
Chris,
time with me and
thank you
coming
so
on the
much,
show.
Chris.
And we're
Yeah.
so excited about your book. And I want you to mention again the collection of short stories. I'm presuming that comes from Random House as well.
Yeah, that'll be out next summer. It's called An Oral History of Atlantis, and it's kind of some of my favorite stories from the last 25 years. So.
Perfect. So more Ed Park to look forward to. And I think I also heard you're already at work maybe on the next novel.
I
So
am,
in 10
yeah.
years, you'll be back. No, I'm just kidding.
Seriously. No, if I could finish it in like 4 or 5 years, I'd be very happy. But
Perfect. Yeah. Well,
we'll see.
yeah, take your time because
Thank you, Chris.
clearly we'll be here ready to read. And,
Okay, I hope so.
yeah. And I'm sure that you'll continue to
Yeah.
be putting stuff out here and there in other places. So, I mean, if you haven't picked up on it in this video so far, you can find Ed Park talking about all kinds of stuff across all kinds of different venues.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I love your show. It's been great getting to know you, and I love this conversation. So I'm very thankful.
Thank you so much. All
All
right.
right.
Well, until next time, take care. And thank you so much for coming on Leaf by Leaf.